Hi guys, today is the day. We are going to be counting down our artists of the year and albums of the year. So without further ado, let's get into this. First, we're going to start off with some honourable mentions. First we have... let's get yourself sorted. Let's go. First we have Kane Hill. The reason why I picked these guys to go on some honourable mentions because there's so many to pick from. I feel that they did a really good job this year in delivering what I wasn't expecting. They totally blew it out of the water this year. They totally knew what they were doing. I mean, I listened to these guys last year, but they were nothing like how they are now. They have grown as a band. My next honourable mention is Jacob. Simply because this is his first track that he has released this year. And when I heard when that chorus hit in, it was absolutely perfect. I just can't wait to see what this guy has to go with next year. Next, we have Architects. I mean, come on, Architects are Architects. But they totally changed everything up this year. I mean, even though they sound different, they sound like a really good band still. Even with changing their sound, they don't sound very too far from what their last album sounded like, which I'm impressed that they managed to pull this off, which I can't wait to hear the album, which I'll be reacting to in February. Next, we have Humanity's Last Breath. I mean, the first time I heard these guys, I was like, what is this? Have I stepped into another realm? This was just, it was just mesmerizing, but also very heavy at the same time. And that's why I think I liked it. It's something a bit unique because the guitar was so different to anything else I've ever heard. Next, I know these guys are an older band, but Cheetos Magazine. Because when I heard these guys this year, I was like, what the hell is this? And then the more I listened to it, the more I started to appreciate it. And it just... I've never heard anything quite like it. Why? I wonder why Nintendo hasn't hired them yet. Come on. Next, we have the Deer Hunter. The reason why I put these guys on the list, even though they haven't released anything in quite a while with vocals, when I found these guys this year, I was just like, yes, this is exactly what I want. Because I'm not always about the heavy. I always, like something different every now and then. I don't always want to be bashing my head against the wall. Next, we have Make Them Suffer. The reason why I pick these guys is because these guys deserve it. Because of how they are. They don't sound bland and repetitive, which the previous album they released I wasn't as much of a fan of because it was not very interesting to me, if I'm being completely honest. Next, we have Sleep Token. Alright, where do I start with these guys? These guys I have been following for a while now, and every time I hear their music, it is just perfect. Literally, it was just. There's nothing wrong with each individual song they have put out for their most recent album, which is their debut album, and I can't wait to see what they offer in the future. And finally, in the honourable mentions, we have Worm Shepherd. Now, these guys I've been listening to for a while now, since Devin started by himself and then grew into Worm Shepherd. And oh my god, those guttural vocals! What has happened? These guys just know how to be heavy and heavy, really, really, really heavy. I don't even know how to describe it. It's that heavy. So without further ado, let's now move on to the real artists of the year. Yeah. To start off with, we have Death Heaven. You see, these guys, when I found them this year, I was kind of like, this is so different, and I didn't really know what to make of it at first, because when I started listening to them, I couldn't really get into their sound, but the more I listened to it, the more I understood why some people like them and some people might not, because the blends can be crazy, but these guys can just do a great job. Next, we have Dirty Loops. I mean, when I first discovered these guys this year, it just made me feel happy inside. There was just something about these guys when I first listened to them that was just nice and something different that I wouldn't normally go towards, but it was totally worth my time. And I recommend, if you're a fan of that R&B type funky jazz style, then go ahead and listen to them, because I would highly recommend so. Next, we have Darko US. I mean, come on. There is literally nothing else to say about them other than really, really heavy, stupidly heavy. But the thing they find with their chorus sections, if you can call it that, is that they just blow it out the water. They know what they are doing. They just know how to make something that's heavy, but also kind of catch it at the same time, while pretty much bashing your brain in with lots of breakdowns. Next, we have Bury Tomorrow. The thing is with these guys, when I discovered them last year, I was already sold on them, but it wasn't until this year when they released Cannibal, the album Cannibal. That's when they started to make me even happier than the previous album they released, because it was just so memorable. Everything on that album was so memorable, and I don't know what else to say about them other than just go check them out if you haven't already. Next, we have Grayscale. Now, I only started discovering these guys during the summer this year, and I was half sold on them. But when they released Diamonds, that's when I was sold on them, because that song was just so memorable, and it just works. They know what they were doing when creating this track, because even though a lot of people might not have liked the track, in my mind, it's just a perfect track from a band that don't normally go into this type of genre, but they did it really well. Anyway, let's move on to the next band with Pale Skin. Now, when I discovered these guys, maybe beginning of this year, maybe summer, I was just immediately I fell in love with their sound. It was just perfect. There was nothing bad about their sound. It just made me feel what the song was trying to make me feel. And if you love that, what shall I say, like emo slash poppy type stuff within like 2.5 minute songs, and I would highly recommend you go check them out. Just do it. Next, we have the Amity Affliction. Now, when I discovered these guys with the new album, I think I discovered them last year with the song Pittsburgh. Now, that song was good, but when I heard their most recent album, I was immediately sold on it, even though it was totally different from what they normally go to. It was more, I would say it's a lot softer, but it still stands there for me. It's one of those highly contagious albums, and I'm yet to go back to listen to their old discography. Next, we have DMAs. I mean, when I discovered these guys, I don't normally listen to the radio, but when these guys came on the radio for the first time and I heard them, I was immediately sold. Even though I don't tend to go for that type of sound, because that indie Britpop type sound isn't my thing. But when I discovered these guys, it made me think differently, because these guys do it really well, and I cannot wait to see what they do in the future. Next, we have Spirit Box. Now, this band can really do a good job of pulling you in different directions. They almost have like something for every type of genre. They can go from really heavy to make you want to cry. You know, like Constance. I'm pretty much sure you saw that going around YouTube, how it made people cry. And then you got Holy Roller, which just was heavy. Especially the one with Rio on it from Crystal Lake. Anyways, let's move on to my final artist of the year, which is Talon. Now, these guys, I was just blown away when I first heard these guys. The sound is so heavy, but it sounds controlled at the same time. It doesn't sound forced. It is just so different from anything else I've ever heard from any artist, from any band, from anything in this genre. Because they really refresh things, and I cannot wait to see what they get up to next year. Without further ado, let's go on to the honourable mentions for Album of the Year. First of all, we have Emma Ruth Rundle with the album May Our Chambers Be Full. When I heard this album, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. It was just on my radar for a while, but I didn't really listen to it until this week, which you may have seen the reaction to. If you haven't, please do. You might be intrigued like I was. This collaboration, which I didn't know any of these two artists before going into this album, I was just really mesmerized by how they pulled both the genres together, whatever those genres were supposed to be. maybe like folk rock with black metal. But the way they pulled it together was just, they did it really, really well. Next we have Within the Ruins with Black Heart. When I first heard this album, I was like, this is totally refreshing for me, because with deathcore slash metal, whatever genre it is within the metal scene, this album just, they did a really good job in making me interested and not making me lose interest. This is what made me keep coming back to this album, but I didn't feel like it was strong enough for it to be album of the year or be in the top 5. Anyway, guys, let's move on to the next album, which is Boundaries with Your Receding Warmth. When I heard this album, I wasn't really expecting much, since it's a hardcore album. I'm not a big hardcore guy, because I can find it very boring sometimes, but the way they pulled it together was just not what I was expecting at all. It was like, it wasn't just hardcore, it was a lot of metalcore influences as well, from maybe early 2000s, which is why I think I liked it a lot more than I thought I would have done. Anyways, let's move on to the next album mentioned, which is I Don't Know How But They Found Me with Razzmatazz. When I first heard I Don't Know How They Found Me with this album, I was like, I could jam to this. You know what I mean? I could feel it trying to make me jam this, because it has that vibe to it that was just so, like, it made me feel happy. If you guys like that indie pop rock type sound, then please go check it out, because I did this on the channel and I was happy with it. Next we have Cigarettes After Sex with the album Cry. Now, for some people this might be a little bit boring, because it is quite slow, very chill, and very just soothing. It has a different vibe to it, which I enjoy. I enjoy that type of sound when I'm in that sort of mood to be able to feel that way. That's really all I can say about this album. Is calm, melodic, and just peaceful to listen to when you're not really wanting to listen to metal all the time, like myself. Because I can find it a bit annoying sometimes, but let's move on to the next album of the honorable mention, which is Frozen Clouds with Palm Tree Oblivion. Now, these guys are a very small band. They haven't released the right lot, but at first I didn't know if I could consider this an album, since it's 18 minutes across like maybe 8 tracks. But when I listened to this album, it was just really, it pulled me in, and it reminded me of those 2000s like post-hardcore type sound, which I'm a fan of. I thought it works really well, and it doesn't, and the mix isn't too bad for it to be a new band, and I can't wait to see what they put out in the future. Next we have, excuse me if I say this wrong, but Cerebellion with the album Beyond Our Failures. Now, when I heard this album, I was like, this reminded me of a lot of, give me some Thrash vibes, some Avenged Sevenfold vibes. And I could feel their presence. I could feel what they wanted me to feel with this album. It's a great album. if you haven't listened to it. It is a perfect album for a band that haven't got many streams on Spotify. Go give them some streams. They need it. They did an incredible job with their new album, and I can't wait to see what they put out in the future. And finally, we have Dethroner with the album Overthrown. Or if you want to get complicated, Defrixona. Why they put the X in there, I have no idea. But this album was so different because there is so many different vibes within the album. There's slam, rap, nu metal, trap. I mean, there is so many different vibes, and I was wondering how they pull this together. But when I came together, I was like, this works really well. But there was probably 2 tracks on there which I was like, okay, maybe I could have done without. But overall, the album over the 27 minutes was just perfect. It didn't really do anything too bad for me, to be honest. Alright, let's move on to the official albums of the year. Starting with firstly, we have Death Heaven with the album 10 Years Gone. Now, this album just really did something different for me because Death Heaven are a band that I didn't discover till this year, and I was like, when I first heard their sound, I was, like I said before, they were very different for me. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And then after a long time of listening to discography now, for maybe six months-ish, it has grown on me, it has stayed with me, and I cannot wait to see what else they've got in store for the future. Next, we have Bury Tomorrow with the album Cannibal. Now, these guys did a really good job with this album. They did an amazing job in pulling this album together without making it boring, because a lot of metalcore nowadays can be quite boring and uninteresting. But Bury Tomorrow, for me, really make it onto this list because of how powerful and unique some of the sections are. Like when the clean vocals come in, it really hits. It really knows how to be a good album. And every single chorus and every single song on this album just works so perfectly without having a single problem with them. Okay, next we have Pucifer with Existential Reckoning. When I first heard these guys, I was very unsure of their sound because it was totally alien to me. And by the time I got to the end of the album, I was thinking, is that it? Is that it? Is that all there is? And that's why I think this is why it should be on the album. Because it just works so perfectly without feeling too much of a struggle to get through. Because I don't normally go for 60-minute albums. Because I just feel like it can drag a lot sometimes. But with this album, it didn't feel like it was dragging. It felt like I was experiencing something else. Like I'm supposing Maynard wanted everybody to feel. Next, we have Imminence with Turn the Light On Acoustic Reimagination. When I heard these acoustic songs, I was like, absolutely stunning. There is nothing more beautiful than these songs. It just puts me in a happy, but it can also make you feel the emotions that it's trying to make you feel, like sadness. But the way they pull it across is unlike any other acoustic songs I have ever heard. That's why it deserves a spot on this list. Next, we have Bring Me the Horizon with Post-Human Survival Horror. Now, the last album they put out called Ammo, I wasn't a huge fan of, if I'm being completely honest, because it just wasn't that great at all. I mean, there was maybe one or two good tracks on the album, but when they released Post-Human Survival Horror, it completely changed everything for me. Because it went back to that almost like Sempiternal type album sound. And when I heard this, it just works really well. It's just so good. It's something that I wouldn't stop jamming. Next, we have Dirty Loops with the EP Phoenix. Now, even though, yes, this is an EP, but this deserves to go on the list because these guys know how to do things. They know what they are doing. And I'm not an R&B type guy, but coming from a more pop background when I was younger, when I was little, this makes perfect sense to me. And it just deserves to be on this list for the amount of time that I feel like has gone into this album, this EP, sorry. But it feels like I want more. I want an album. I want an album. That's what I like about it. What makes me want more. Next, we have Tower with the album Metrifugy. Now, when I first, and then the more I listened to it, the more it made me want to come back and listen to it again and again and add it to playlists to just listen to every single week. I mean, come on, there is not one skippable track on this album. It all just flows really well. And yeah, what more else is there to say about it? Next, we have DMAs with the album The Glow. Now, when I first discovered the DMAs, I was very skeptical because this is not my normal go-to. Because this type of genre isn't something that I tend to like because it can be very boring and I'm not really into that Manchester scene type music that was around in the 90s because it's very boring. It just doesn't appeal to me. But then when the DMAs came across with the album The Glow, I was very happy with it because it felt nicer to listen to. It didn't feel boring. Nothing was lagging throughout the album. And it just deserves to be on this list. And now, drum roll for my favorite album of 2020 goes to The Amity Affliction with the album Everyone Loves You Once You Leave Them. Now, I was really happy when I heard this album, and it stuck with me ever since it released. I think back in March, if I'm not wrong. But normally albums that come out like towards the beginning of the year, I don't tend to remember because it's a long time ago and nobody remembers that far back, especially if you're like me. But this album has really stuck with me. It feels good to listen to, and it's just perfect. You know, there is nothing wrong with this album. Every song is just perfectly made. There's no single problem with this album, and I recommend this album anymore if you're like me who grew up in a more pop background and appreciate stuff like this. Because I like how they blended the pop elements with the metal elements. It just works perfectly together, which I wasn't expecting to. Because I listened to you guys last year with the song Pittsburgh and not heard anything else since that until this album. And that was a pretty heavy track. This felt really atmospheric, really well done, really well built up. And I couldn't recommend it anymore. Now, guys, tell me your picks for Artists of the Year and Albums of the Year in the comments down below. Hopefully, see you guys tomorrow in our first ever 2021 video, which I will be scheduling soon. So, until then, peace. Good night. See you in 2021.